just about anything that has a deadline on it it's overwhelming to me. You know, time escapes me, and I'm unable ever to effectively manage that. So it's hard for me to plan and have realistic goals and timetables. I cannot master it.
There are 44 to 48 million children in the United States between the ages of 5 and 18. Some 3 million of them have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. There are approximately 240 million adults in this country. As many as 7.2 million of them also suffer from ADHD. I'm Russell Barkley, professor of psychiatry and neurology at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. In this video, I will present a new framework for understanding ADHD. Central to this framework is my belief that the ultimate impact of this disorder is to impair the sense of oneself across time. We will see how this impaired sense of time flows from a single underlying deficit, a particular difficulty with the inhibition of responses to immediate environmental events. What is most exciting about this new approach is the deeper understanding of the nature of ADHD that it provides. From this new level of understanding, we can derive principles that can facilitate the search for effective interventions. These principles also help explain why many existing treatments work well, while some others do not. Before I turn to this new theory, let's look back a bit at how ADHD was understood in the recent past. This is important to do because by the end of the 1980s, a great deal had been learned about this disability. The consensus held by most researchers at that time was that the disorder stemmed from a central problem with attention. This attention deficit was seen as having three main components: inattention, including poor sustained attention and distractibility, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. There was agreement that the disorder begins in childhood and is relatively stable and persistent over time. At least 80% of the children diagnosed appear to have it 10 years later, during mid-adolescence. Up to 65 to 70% of those diagnosed in childhood continue to be symptomatic into adulthood. ADHD typically produces impairments in major life activities. The person often demonstrates significant difficulties in school functioning, peer relationships, occupational success, family functioning, and responsibilities of self-care and daily living.
I have been privileged to have parents share with me what their lives are like. What parents will describe is living day in and day out with a sense of discouragement and guilt that there must be something that they're doing wrong that is creating all of this stress and all of these behavioral difficulties with their children.
Probably when she was in her toddler years. She used to attack her cousins quite a bit. She was very aggressive. Finally, she was uncontrollable in the classroom, and they just didn't know how to deal with her, and they wanted to hold her back another year.
And then we started, probably when he started nursery school, we realized that he wasn't like other children. He immediately had problems in nursery school. Having other friends to the house or anything like that, he would really not get along socially. Other kids didn't like him.
Well, I think the impact of adult ADHD is quite pervasive. For those who truly suffer from ADHD, it causes a great deal of disruption to a person's life.
It was like all of my life I was putting myself down because I always thought I was stupid or I didn't get things the first time around.
Academically, like I said, going through grammar school, I went through numerous grammar schools, due to the fact that it was just labeled a discipline problem. Going into a school and finding you're going to be going into a, quote, an adjustment class or a grade where you're going to be seeking help. So right away you got another label, okay? You know, he's going to room 201 because that's where they have the kids that have problems. So you got another label on you.
ADHD often occurs in conjunction with other disorders. Specifically, 40 to 65% of those having ADHD also show oppositional defiant disorder. 25 to 45% have conduct disorder. 30 to 35% have learning disabilities, and 15 to 27% may have major depression. Cross-cultural studies find that this disorder occurs in all countries and ethnic groups. This was the picture we had of ADHD as the 1980s came to a close. While the descriptions of ADHD that researchers had pulled together remain accurate and useful today, the old model was lacking in several key respects. For a theoretical model to be useful, it should help explain why a particular group of problems occur together in a specific condition, and it also should explain what goes wrong in normal development to produce that condition. The old model lacked such explanatory power. Instead, what we had was a checklist of observable difficulties. Second, attention deficits come in many different forms and occur in a wide variety of conditions and are therefore not specific to ADHD. Furthermore, recent research findings indicate that a deficit in attention is not the central problem. People with ADHD don't show attention deficits in many situations when attention is defined as accurately perceiving incoming stimuli. What are some of the new findings that the old model does not predict? Children with the disorder show delays in the internalization of speech, an important developmental step that helps promote self-control. Such children are also less able to accurately estimate the passage of time. Finally, they also have difficulty with flexibility in solving problems and in organizing their thoughts to quickly achieve their goals. When a scientific model no longer accurately explains new findings, scientists begin to search for a new paradigm. With ADHD, that shift has been taking place since the early 1990s. Scientists came to view problems with inhibitory control, not attention, as the underlying deficit. Some also began to consider whether ADHD might also involve problems with self-control and certain other important mental functions, although these concepts tended to remain vague and ill-defined. The new framework for understanding ADHD that I am presenting here represents my own effort to explain more precisely how this underlying deficit in inhibition gives rise to the wide range of problems that we see with this disorder. This problem with inhibition means that people with the disorder are less able to delay responding to the world around them. Because it is so hard for them not to react impulsively to immediate events, people with ADHD are less able to develop certain mental abilities. As we shall see, these particular mental abilities serve the purpose of helping us orient ourselves away from the moment and toward the future. The person with ADHD is therefore handicapped in this future orientation, a key part of a person's sense of self across time. Moving from an attention-based model to an inhibition model for ADHD requires a shift in focus from the input side of the brain to the output side, which we can see more clearly on this image of the brain. From the neurological perspective, we are talking about a shift from the part of the brain that regulates attention to the area of the brain that regulates inhibition and future-directed behavior. The new model addresses the following three questions. What are the specific developmental and cognitive problems which arise from this underlying problem with inhibition? How do these particular problems interact to lead to an impaired sense of self across time? What implications does this model have for designing effective treatment interventions? Before we answer these questions, I want to return to the relationship between inhibition of responses to the immediate environment and the individual's capacity to develop certain mental abilities that support one's orientation toward the future. I'm talking here about 4 types of mental abilities. I want to review how each of them develop in normal individuals who do not have a problem with inhibition, and then we will return to what happens with ADHD. The 4 mental abilities are working memory, internalized speech, emotional control, and creative problem solving. Each represents a major step in the individual's development of internal control over the flow of both external behavior and mental activity. For this reason, they are often called executive abilities. These 4 executive abilities also underlie our capacity to experience ourselves across time and organize our responses to the future. First, let's think about inhibition. Humans have a gift for waiting, for not having to respond immediately to events that happen. This exceptionally important capacity for inhibition starts to develop within the first months of life and will take 10 to 20 years to fully mature. While it may not seem so to many parents of babies and toddlers, by 12 months of age, the human infant is far superior to any other species in this capacity to inhibit responses. There are 3 key features of inhibition. First, being able to resist the urge to act. Second, being able to stop responding midstream if our behavior is proving ineffective. And third, being able to withstand distraction while we are engaged in thoughtful action.
It's a race. It's every idea is a good new idea and worth taking off on. And I go upstairs, I'm looking for an item. And somehow, going from point A to point B, something else comes into mind, and I take off on that. And I was supposed to bring the laundry down. But I never got the laundry down because I walked by Richie's room. And then I saw a book that I really wanted to at least look at. And when I saw the book, I remembered that something was overdue at the library. It's a constant. It's that run-on sentence.
An adequate capacity for inhibition is a prerequisite for the effective development of the 4 executive abilities. Now, let's discuss each of the 4 executive abilities in more detail. The first is working memory. Working memory is comprised of 3 elements, which develop sequentially in the young child. Holding information in mind, such as images, sounds, sensations, and perceptions. Looking back at information we have dealt with in the past, sometimes called retrospection. Foresight, or sensing the future, sometimes called prospection. We achieve foresight by looking back and discovering meaningful patterns from the past. These patterns are then applied to the future as our educated guesses about what will happen next. These 3 elements form the basic building blocks of our ability to see ourselves across time, recalling our past and envisioning ourselves in the future. The second executive function is internalized speech, the mind's voice. Initially, children use language to describe and label things and to instruct and question others. As speech gradually develops, it takes on an additional, extremely important function. In addition to its public outer direction, it is also directed towards the self and becomes private, a process that is typically complete by the age of 10 to 12 years. Self-directed private speech comes to serve the same structuring and self-regulating purposes within the self. An internal dialogue takes place in which inner speech enables us to reflect on events, describe things, and question and instruct ourselves. In conjunction with working memory, inner speech can help guide behavior over extended periods of time. This results in part from the creation of internal rules for how to respond to particular situations based on what has happened in the past and how we imagine things will go in the future. The third executive ability is emotional control. The child first expresses emotion only toward others in a fashion that is not under much self-control. Gradually, the ability develops to express emotion internally as well, in a much more self-regulated manner. Controlled inner emotional responses in interaction with working memory and internalized speech ultimately give rise to what we call intrinsic motivation. We use terms like persistence, doggedness, determination, ambition, and willpower to describe what we see when intrinsic motivation is guiding the individual's behavior. Immediate external rewards and consequences become much less important as intrinsic motivation directed at long-term goals takes over. From this perspective, emotional control helps the individual move effectively towards the future. The fourth and last executive ability, which is also the last to develop, is creative problem solving. There are two main components of creative problem solving: analysis and synthesis. Analysis enables us to take old behavior patterns apart. Synthesis permits us to recombine behaviors into novel patterns. Many of the new combinations may be useless, but some will be useful, and a few will be creative gems. Creative problem solving arises out of child's play. Play teaches children the physics of the way the world works, how to take it apart, and then how to recombine it into novel arrangements. As the child grows, so does the ability to mentally play with information. Creative problem solving in interaction with working memory, internalized speech, and emotional control gradually enables us to adapt to new information, predict what may happen, and invent strategies about how to respond most effectively to future events. To sum up so far, we began with the ability to wait, which is inhibition. This then permits the development of the four executive abilities: working memory, internalized speech, emotional control, and creative problem solving. As children mature, the four executive abilities enable them to organize and carry out increasingly complex sequences of responses. Behavior becomes more internally regulated, persistent, efficient, and goal-directed. Scientific thinking now suggests that there are specific areas of the brain underlying each of these components. Inhibition and the executive abilities are primarily supported by what is called the prefrontal region. The first highlighted area of the prefrontal cortex regulates our capacity for inhibition. The areas adjacent to that one, occupying the outside surfaces of the prefrontal region, underlie working memory. The right side seems to be more involved in working memory, and the left is more involved in internalized speech. A region on the walls found between the two hemispheres contributes to our emotional self-control. And this area, in front of the cortex, just behind the forehead, seems to underlie creative problem solving. In well-functioning individuals, these brain regions and the functions they support work together in concert. Over the 20 to 30 years these abilities take to mature, the individual is increasingly able to choose to respond or not to respond, to engage in flexible, self-controlled behavior, to adapt to change, and to anticipate the future. Such an individual is able to reap long-term benefits from current goal-directed behavior. It's very much like an orchestra, with each section of the orchestra interacting to make the music come alive and accomplish the goal of performing an elegant, harmonious symphony. In ADHD, inhibition is impaired. Because of this relative weakness in the ability to wait, each of the four executive abilities dependent upon it become compromised as well. Each executive ability is more erratic, making the overall executive system less effective in controlling and guiding behavior.
There is the big movement activity, and this is what we stereotypically associate with ADHD, the running and jumping and climbing and racing off through the shopping mall and crawling around under the furniture in restaurants, standing up on on the benches in a bus stop. But there's also small movement activity, all of the fidgeting and wiggling and jiggling and sitting on the feet and tapping on the table during dinner time.
What arises from the problem with disinhibition or behavioral control is an overreactivity, an over-behaving, if you will, in that adults will, because they don't have a governor to be able to put on their behavior, they will over-behave in situations in work, or over-speak, or impulsively speak, or become hyperactive or impulsive in a way that's very disrupting to themselves and to other people.
The person's mental orchestra is out of sync. Because they can't inhibit their immediate urge to react to events, people with this condition become less able to hold and remember information, to recall the past, and to anticipate the future. Their problem with inhibition also impedes the development of internalized speech, the mind's voice.
Number one, I hear adults complain frequently about their impulsive speech. So they may have a thought that's on their mind, and then it's on their mind, and before they know it, it's out their mouth, and it's inappropriate, or it causes problems with a boss, or it causes problems with a spouse, and they will often say, "Oh, I can't believe I said that. There I go again. I can't seem to hold back and keep my mouth shut when I really should."
Children with ADHD are more talkative than other children of the same age. Not only are they more talkative in interactions with people, but they talk to themselves. They talk to themselves as they're playing. They talk to themselves or hum to themselves or sing to themselves as they're working their way through a task.
So people with ADHD are less able to describe, reflect, instruct, and question themselves from within. They are also less able to generate internal rules that promote self-control and regulate behavior across time. Also stemming from this problem with inhibition, emotions remain more public, less internalized, and less well controlled. They often are more emotionally immature and more prone to anger and frustration.
If they're happy, they're really happy. They're going to put their arms around you. They're going to jump up and down with excitement. If they're angry, they're really angry, and they'll have a tantrum, and they'll make a face, they'll stomp their feet. If they're sad, you'll see, the tearfulness is very open. They are more volatile than other children of the same age. They have more difficulty regulating their emotional reactions to things going on around them.
Their ability to follow through and persist over time is more limited, thus explaining their problems with sustained attention. This problem with attention, formerly thought to be the central deficit in ADHD, actually results from their limited ability to motivate themselves from within. This relative weakness in intrinsic motivation makes them less capable of working effectively across time toward future goals.
They tend to have fade. They start something, a ball of fire, with a lot of energy, with a lot of intent towards, now it's going to get done, I'm really going to do it this time. And then through getting sidetracked and drawn off task from other things, they are unable to sustain their motivation and their effort and their behavior towards that goal-directed task in order to finish it.
Finally, because of their problem with inhibition, they are not as able to take apart, analyze, and recombine information into new solutions. This weakness in creative problem solving limits their capacity to effectively prepare to tackle future situations. In ADHD, then, all four executive abilities are compromised. They are also less efficient as agents of self-control and less able to help the individual make optimal use of the past and the present to create educated guesses about the future. Because of all these difficulties, the person is much less able to succeed at activities which must be organized and sustained over time. They have trouble keeping their mind's eye on the prize, leaving them more vulnerable to the influences of the moment.
The theory would suggest that their window of time is not expanding around them. at the same pace as other children of the same age. And they're much more focused on what's going on right here, right now, in this moment.
I have come to believe that it is this sense of oneself across time and into the future that is the central executive. Time, in effect, is the organizing principle of our mental orchestra because of its profound role in decision-making and regulating our behavior. We could say that the person with ADHD suffers from time blindness. More accurately, the person is nearsighted when it comes to time, dealing with events only when they become close at hand, while neglecting those that lie farther ahead in the future. How can we treat this deficiency in inhibition and the problems that arise from it, including the individual's impaired sense of time? An effective treatment for ADHD should include several key components. A treatment approach that includes all of these components will be the most successful. First, a careful diagnostic evaluation is needed to confirm that the person, in fact, has the disorder. In the absence of a sound, theory-based evaluation, people are at risk of getting the wrong diagnosis and possibly the wrong treatment.
This disorder is vulnerable to misdiagnosis, overdiagnosis, and underdiagnosis. So it requires the clinician to be very rigorous, very comprehensive, and be able to fully understand the breadth of this person's history, because the diagnosis of adult ADHD rests very heavily on a childhood history of significant symptoms and associated impairment.
The second step is to educate that person and those closest to them about the nature of the disorder. Since the new theory explains how these difficulties arise and why they occur together, we are now in a position to help people with ADHD understand their problem. This means that they will be better able to understand themselves. This can help minimize the endless cycles of frustration, anger, and lowered self-esteem that so often develop in people with the disorder.
When a parent hears that their child has been diagnosed with ADHD, for many parents, an initial reaction is relief, because it helps them to understand why their child's behavior has been so difficult to manage.
I will always ask that person, does that seem to square with how you view yourself? Am I saying anything that's very surprising to you? And almost always, they just nod and say, finally somebody understands me. No, that sounds right on. That exactly captures my life experience, and it is such a tremendous relief at being understood.
The third component of the treatment package is to give serious consideration to the use of medications. The new theory also provides a clearer framework for the understanding of why medications can be so helpful. The reason medications work so well is that psychostimulants such as Ritalin, Adderall, Dexedrine, and Cylert enhance the brain's inhibitory mechanisms. Through this activation of the inhibitory system, the individual becomes more capable of resisting the urge to act. The person will also be better able to stop responding midstream if behavior is proving ineffective. And that person can more easily withstand distraction. This improvement in inhibition, in turn, supports more effective functioning by the four executive abilities. It facilitates their control over ongoing behavior. Other medications, including some antidepressants and at least one antihypertensive, have also proved to be helpful.
What's easier with the medication is I can do it. And I can do it without becoming terribly frustrated. Just taking the medication hasn't made me any smarter and hasn't made me any dumber, but what it has enabled me to do is to be able to maintain my focus and composure, and in a way really help my self-esteem. I mean, I really feel good about myself now.
The fourth component in the treatment package consists of interventions that help make accommodations for the difficulties these people have. They do so by modifying the specific environments in which those symptoms are most problematic. As we have seen, the new theory suggests that the ultimate impact of weakened inhibition in ADHD is an impaired sense of oneself over time. It is a kind of time blindness in which the individual is less able to make use of the past and the present to anticipate the future. Indeed, tasks and situations that involve time, forethought, and the future are the most disabling. As long as tasks are structured so that there is little delay between the individual's responses and the outcomes of those responses, people with ADHD have little or no difficulty performing well. For instance, people with this condition may be able to play video games as well as those who do not have the disorder, because the games provide immediate feedback about performance. When delays do exist between the individual's responses and the outcomes of those responses, however, performance is increasingly impaired. For example, a child with ADHD might be lost if given the assignment to read a book and complete a book report to be handed in 2 months later. Within this broad time span, there are too many opportunities for difficulties with self-control to disrupt performance. Instead, the task should be broken down into manageable time intervals. One short chapter could be assigned each day, with a single paragraph to be turned in afterwards. Then an immediate reward should be provided. With this restructuring, the child is more likely to do an excellent job. This example illustrates the way that time can be the enemy of the person with ADHD, yet it also demonstrates how bridging time, by breaking the task down into smaller units, can help the person organize and maintain his performance at a higher level. We need to ask the question, where is the point of performance for the task at hand? The phrase point of performance is important because it focuses our attention on the precise setting where the person is having trouble doing what they need to do. If the problem is completion of work in the classroom, getting along with the kids on the playground, or learning how to load the dishwasher at home, the point of performance is in each of these settings, and that is where we need to locate our intervention. The farther away an intervention is in space and in time from the point of performance, the less effective that intervention will be. In addition to the great importance of structuring tasks to minimize the time interval between responses and outcomes, this theory suggests that placing key information at the point of performance that can help guide, organize, and maintain their behavior can help make up for the deficiencies in the 4 executive abilities. For example, in the classroom or work setting, it will be helpful to minimize distractions and display information directly associated with carrying out the task at hand. Such interventions will assist the individual to compensate for the underlying problem with inhibition and deficiencies in working memory.
The idea is to try to create prompts or cues in the environment to jog their memory and make sure that they remember or can stop, look, and listen again instead of getting sidetracked or just losing complete track of time.
Because of the underdevelopment of internalized speech, people with ADHD are less able to regulate their behavior using their own internalized rules. Displaying rules that support on-task behavior at the point of performance can help them compensate for this problem.
They require more external support and guidance for their behavior because internally they're not able to do that as well for themselves.
Since they also have an underdeveloped ability for emotional control, with a related weakness in intrinsic motivation, it is crucial to augment this executive ability by providing external sources of motivation at the point of performance. This might consist of using artificial rewards, such as tokens, which the child earns by performing the activity. These tokens can later be exchanged for privileges or treats. ADHD leads to a difficulty with creative problem solving. To address this difficulty, problems should be written down using a word processor or physically broken down into their components to allow the person to manually manipulate those components. Because their attention is captured more readily by physical forms of information, they will be more likely to find this approach to problem solving useful. Finally, in combination with the types of interventions already mentioned, placing external representations of time at the point of performance can be helpful in supporting successful functioning. If the individual's internal clock does not function well, we can place an external clock at the point of performance. With a child in school, instead of announcing that there are 30 minutes left to complete a task, it might be far more helpful to place a timer or clock on the desk that clearly shows the passage of time, and say that when the bell rings or the big hand gets to the 6, the task needs to be finished. This device should have a traditional clock face with hands and numbers to give the child not only a sense of the passage of time, but also an indication of how much time remains. ADHD is often a chronic condition for which currently there is no cure. Treatments need to be maintained because when they are withdrawn, the individual's functioning usually will decline sharply. If a sound treatment package is kept in place, people can compensate for this disorder very effectively. They can live their lives to the best of their ability, and they can make truly outstanding contributions in all walks of life. Living well with this condition requires the understanding, support, and love of those closest to the person with the disorder. I believe that understanding how one comes to organize behavior across time is the key to unlocking the mystery of ADHD. I hope that this new way of thinking will help encourage others to continue to develop ways of promoting the success of those who have the disorder. We can take the best of what we have learned in the past and what we now know today and apply it toward a brighter future for those with ADHD.